Thank you. Thanks, Dirk. Okay, so the good news is it's almost lunchtime. The bad news is you've got to listen to me first. So this is a 45-minute session called Diving into the sap.rules.ui library. What's that all about? So really what I want to do in the next half an hour, 45 minutes, is just take you through the journey I've been on to understand a little bit about business rules, a little bit about where it fits. There are some really nice libraries within UI5 for working with the business rules from an authoring perspective. But they're actually quite complex, or they can seem complex at the outset. So what I really want to do, I think the key word is demystify. I want to demystify the business rules mechanism, the APIs, and the libraries, and in particular the rule builder control, so that if you go away from this session, at least you've seen it with your own eyes. There's no slides. I've got one diagram, which is actually on a slide, so technically it's one slide. But the rest we're just going to do bit by bit with some coding. So there we go. So please ask. I know we've got the box. I'm dying to throw the box. But also please ask questions and interrupt as you see fit. So I'm going to open all these. The business rules. I'm also going to open up a little terminal session as well, because why not? The business rules service is a service on the SAP Cloud Platform. And whereabouts is that? Well, in particular, let me just make this full screen as well. There we go. It's here. So if you look in the services within the SAP Cloud Platform cockpit, the business rule service lives alongside other services in integration. And I've just come from a really good presentation by Jörg upstairs in room B about the workflow service. And I sort of see the business rule service as a brother or a sister to the workflow service. They belong together. They're actually developed by the same group of awesome people in Waldorf, and they sort of complement each other quite well. So you can build workflows with the workflow service, and you can build decision logic with the business rule service. The whole idea of the business rule service, as it sort of says here, I think the word enrich sort of puts me off. It sounds a bit marketing-y. But basically, the idea of the business rules mechanism is that you can take away or take out business logic that you want your users to own, configuration, for example, out of your application and maintain it separately. So that when a user comes along 2 months after you've deployed your application and says, oh, I just want to tweak this parameter or this setting, or I want this to work differently, you don't have to modify the application. You can actually say, well, please go over there. There's a nice application for you to maintain those business rules that we set up with you. Okay, so the business rules might be, and just going on from Jörg's presentation previously, it might be, well, let's work out how to work out who the approver is for an approval workflow, for example. Or it might be, purchase discount percentages or whatever. So I've got a really simple example of a business rule decision table. So these rules come in the form of decision tables for the most part, and it's just about airlines and discounts that airlines have. Maybe I was influenced by S-Flight, which is still my favorite. I shouldn't say that. It's still my favorite demo data. EPM is good, but it's a bit boring. It's S-Flight is good. Anyway, so that's where the business rules service lives. Here's an example of the. In fact, what I'll do is, if I click on this, I've obviously already enabled it. Down here at the bottom left, it says Configure Business Rules Runtime, Configure Business Rules Repository, Configure Business Rules Editor, and then there's a link to the editor as well, which is here. Now, the key thing to note as developers in this room here is that basically, there's two things. There's a runtime, where you would invoke a business rule from an application, go and find out what the discount for this particular combination of factors is. And also there's a design time, there's a repository, so how you manage the actual business rule definition itself and how you manage the data in the business rules. Okay, so you can manipulate that, you can manipulate the business rule, and you can also deploy business rules to the runtime. Okay, so there's two APIs. We'll have a very brief look at the API hub and look at where those two particular APIs, one for the repository, one for the runtime where they live and what they look like. There's actually 3 APIs, but we'll come to that shortly. I don't want to confuse things now. There's also, for people like us here in the room, a so-called business rules editor. It's sort of an administrative editor with which you can manage so-called business rules projects. I made it a little bit bigger. So I've got in my little test account here, I've got 2 projects. That printer consumables inventory was for a Sapphire demo, but I've got this airline discounts project. So a business rule project contains, and this is, I'm telling you this because we're going to see the data when we start diving in shortly. This business rule project contains a number of different things. It contains, for example, data objects. So a business rule project has structures. Those structures have fields, and these structures are used as sort of inputs structures and result structures. So you invoke a business rule, you pass it some data, and then you get the answer, the discount, for example, in the output structure. So I've got a flight info structure, which just contains one field, airline, the simplest thing that could possibly work. There are also associations. I've got no associations here. We'll see associations shortly when we look at the OData information, and so on. So we've got data objects. We also have the rule itself in the form, as I've mentioned before, of a decision table. There's a text rule as well, but I think 95% of business rules on this service are sort of decision tables. Again, this is the simplest rule that could possibly work. So we've got, on the one hand, we've got the airline, and on the other hand, on the right-hand side, well, the discount for American Airlines is 12%, and the discount for Lufthansa is 11%. Okay, so we have the actual rule itself, and then there's also rule sets which bundle together different rules within the same project using the same data objects. And then finally there's a rule service which collects everything together and is the deployment unit. You'll notice on the right hand side there's the deploy button there. Okay, so already you think, oh my god, this is really complicated. But once you sort of think about this and stare at it for a little bit of time, things start to make sense. I'm only showing you this because when we start looking underneath, hopefully things should make sense. Okay, so I'll invoke the business rule right now, and we'll hopefully see I'll send in a request for Lufthansa, for example, and hopefully see the 11%, well, I think it was 11%, whatever it was, and then we'll invoke it with British Airways, who are a bit rubbish, and then we'll see at the moment no answer from a business rule perspective, but then we'll actually go through with a bit of UI5, use the rule builder to build a very, very simple editor UI with the awesome controls in UI5, activate the whole thing, deploy it, go through all the steps that you need to go through, and then call it again, and hopefully we should see the answer. So yeah, we've got 12% for American Airlines. So I'm going to go and, that's small. I'm going to go into my favorite place, which is, of course, a shell somewhere on the Google Cloud Platform. CD local projects, dive into, So I've got a very simple, and this is actually, sort of deliberately, why did I write this in shell script? Because I can. But basically, this is the way you invoke a business rule. Okay, you get a CSRF token, and you get it back, and then you send in the request, a post request, you send some data. And look down here already, we're already recognizing, where's my cursor? I can't see it. Well, we're already recognizing what we've just seen in our business rule definition in our project. The data object, the structure, was called flight info. That's defined as the input structure. And funnily enough, the field was called airline. Okay, so we're passing in the flight info structure, the airline and the airline code that we specify in the command line. So let's just invoke that. Invoke business rule service. I'll go for Lufthansa. No hard-coded passwords, obviously. There we go. So we get an answer from the business rules runtime API. We get 11%. Okay. If I run that for British Airways, just to show you there's nothing up my sleeves, we get nothing. Okay, we get a list of nothing. So we're going to solve that. That's our aim for the next 30 minutes. Okay, so what we're going to do is have a look at the controls or the APIs that we have in the SDK. So if you look at the API reference and filter on the rules API namespace, we see a number of things. And in fact, this also, for me initially, was a little bit sort of verwirrend. What's that in English? I don't know. Okay. But there's the key thing is a rule builder. That's a UI control. There's a number of other controls and other mechanisms that are not sort of UI centric that go to help the rule builder to be what it is. And we'll see those. We'll see the rule builder. We'll see within the services. We'll see this thing called an expression language. We'll have a look at what that is. And we'll also see some decision table configuration. Okay, so that's just generally where the stuff is in the UI5 SDK. I did mention very briefly the business rules API and where that lives on the API hub. There's two. The design of this is a bit unfortunate. You can't tell which one's which from the title because it's so big. But basically, there on the left-hand side is the business rules runtime API. It's a REST-based API. And on the right, there's the business rules authoring or design time API. It's also a REST API. So what we'll see shortly is that there's also, for the UI5 controls, a rule builder control, which is a more traditional UI5 thing. There's also an OData-based authoring API. And I bet you've never seen an OData service as big as this one. We'll see if anybody can top what we're about to see. Anyway. And that's enough of that. I'm going to close that. And I've got here, blimey, I need glasses, I think I did hear Dirk say one of UI5's old friends.
Best friends.
Best friend, old best friend. Anyway, yes, no, it's good. So all I've got is and I love the web ID namespaces. Amazing. So all I've got in my UI5con SAP 2018 namespace is this little project here, the other one's for the other session. And in here, all I've got is a neoapp.json, and in there, I've got the regular sort of resources and test resources routes, and I've got a route for each of the APIs. The business rules runtime API, which is that REST API, and the business rules repository API, which is the OData flavor of the repository or the design time API. So we're going to be using both of those destinations in what we're going to do. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at this index.html. And obviously, having seen what Peter said, I can't do this anymore. It's all in line. But anyway, what we're going to do is we'll run the index.html, and we'll go step by step, and we'll build up the rule builder control with all the bits and pieces that it needs, look at the calls it's making, so that finally we end up with an editor that looks a bit like the administrative editor that we can give to our users. We can either build into our UI5 apps themselves or have them separate. Why wouldn't you give the users the administrative editor? Because we don't want them to see or mess about with the data objects, the metadata. And also it gives them access to all the data in all the business rules, for example. We don't want that. We want to give them access to their particular departmental rules, for example, and nothing else. So this is the reason that the rule builder control and its entire family of helper things exists. Okay, so I'm going to run this, and then and then we're just going to work within Chrome Developer Tools, obviously. Chrome Developer Tools is my version of PowerPoint. Okay, so come on. There we go. Right, okay. So is that big? Oh, God, that's big enough. Okay, so very simple. I'm a great designer. I've got an app with a page and a button called load. What's going to happen when we call load? Let's have a look. Well, and yes, don't do this at home. Window.x, so I've got access to all the variables and everything. Now, what are these IDs, the business rules, project and rule values? Well, if we look actually at the rule within the administrative editor, we're looking at the airline discounts rule, and if we look at the URL, which is probably too small to see, but if those with good eyesight can see the fact that the hash path says projects brackets some ID. Okay, so there's a project has an ID, and when I select the rule, if we look at the hash path, it gets extended to say, well, within that project, it's the rule that begins 299A and it's version 001. Okay, so those IDs are exactly the IDs that we're seeing here. Okay, so we've got the project name, airline discounts, the rule service name, which we'll need for the deployment shortly. We've got the ID of the project, the ID of the rule, which we've just seen as well, and the rule version, okay? So I'm just going to grab that page and go. So the first thing we need is this thing called a vocabulary model. Now, I've deliberately left it till now, keep you in suspense a little bit, to show you the relationship between all this stuff that we're going to be sort of putting together. So let's have a quick look at the one single slide. On the left-hand side, we've got our rule builder. That's the thing we want to put on the screen, okay? But that rule builder is nothing without its three little helper friends, one of which is this thing called the expression language. We saw that when we were looking at the SDK, the API information in the SDK. The expression language is a thing within the SAP Rules UI Services library, and that provides facilities for parsing and validating expressions that are specific to that particular rule project. Because of course, you know, flight info, discount info, airline, and so on, those are all very specific to this particular rule. So we need a helper to help the rule builder parse whatever the user's putting in. Is that how long I've got left, or is that how? Okay, yeah, it is. 29:58. Okay, good. So what we do is we instantiate, or we will instantiate an expression language instance. Similarly, I mentioned that rules within the business rule service come in two shapes normally. A decision table shape, which we've just seen, and a text-based shape, text-based rules. I've not done a text, I think nobody does text-based rules. Decision tables are 95% of what we see. So we're going to instantiate a decision table configuration control, which will, again, be a helper to the rule builder control to provide almost like a plug-in way of managing the decision table for it. Now you'll notice here that the other two boxes that I haven't talked about yet are both OData model boxes. For making a rule builder control available and doing stuff with it, or allowing the user to do stuff with it, we need two OData services. The first OData service is the so-called vocabulary model OData service. That vocabulary model is a model specific to the project that describes the data objects. What data objects are in the project, discount info, flight info, and so on. And within those particular data objects, what attributes they contain, airline in the flight info and amount in discount or whatever it was, and also any associations. We'll see shortly the call to the OData one. It's actually a read call, okay? So it's a direct call. More traditionally, we also have the rule model OData model itself. That is, or that represents, and that's how we get hold of the actual data in the rule itself. So the Lufthansa, the 12%, the American Airlines, the 11%, and so on. And that, of course, is the OData model with which we will also push back up to the cloud platform, because the cloud's obviously always up there, right? Push back up to the cloud platform the data that the user enters, okay? So that's it. So, and we've got the set model, obviously, there on the rule builder for the rule model, OData model. We've got the set decision table configuration. There's nothing really much to it other than that. Set expression language, and then once we've got the vocabulary OData model, which we'll see shortly, we do a read, we pull down the metadata for our particular rule, and then we set that data, the rule project vocabulary, into the expression language. So the expression language is then knowledgeable suddenly about the particular business rule data objects that we want to allow the users to maintain. Okay, good. So I'll just close that or move it over there. I can never figure out where I am with these slidey things. There we go. Right, there's escape. There we go. Okay. So, with that said, the first thing we're going to do, when I press the button, it runs the go. So the first thing it's going to do really is set up a vocabulary model. It's an OData v2. And it's also going to set up the rule service model. Notice that both of these are from the rules repository destination, okay, or the rules repository path, which is associated with the destination through the root in the neo.json, etc. Okay, so notice also that while we're only going to be reading vocabulary data, we also want to write back two-way. Bit scary, isn't it? We also want to write back rules to the rule service, okay? So we do those. We also create an expression language instance. We also can create a decision table configuration instance. This is pretty much boilerplate as far as I can see as a developer like us here in the room. And then once we've got these two things set up, I instantiate a rule builder control. This is the visual control that we're about to see on the screen. And for the time being, we'll say, well, it's not in edit mode, okay? And the type that it supports is this decision table type. Once I've got the rule builder control, instance control set up, I set the expression language that we've just created onto it. I set the rule model onto it, as in the rule service model, not the vocabulary model. And then I set the decision table onto it as well, just like we saw in the diagram. And once that's done, I slap it on the page. So let's run that now. That's all that there is there. So I'll just run that. In fact, while I run that, let's look on the, where we go? Let's look in the network panel. Let's clear it for now and see what happens. So there's actually quite a bit of stuff that gets loaded. But what we can see, sort of faintly, is the decision table. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. No. So what we can also see, though, if we filter on BPM for the OData calls. And by the way, this came in with what? Chrome 67? I hate that horrible yellow thing. I wish it would go away. So we see the call, the metadata call, of course, to the vocabulary service, and we see the metadata call to the rule service. Okay, let's have a look at that. Have a look at that there. And the vocabulary service is, pretty straightforward actually. It only has, a small number of things. It's got data objects, it's got associations, it's got attributes and so on. All the things that we've just been seeing and been talking about. Okay, so this is sort of proof, as it were, that this is the sort of stuff that's being retrieved. Okay, if we have a look at the metadata for the rule service. Let me just scroll down a bit. Ooh, there we go. Smaller, bit smaller. Oh, there we go. I don't know why it's not scrolling. Let's run that again. Oh well. Believe me, it's huge. It has about 10 or 20. I don't know why. This is a new XML view I'm trying out. It's not very good. Well, it is good, but it doesn't scroll sometimes. Anyway, there are 10, 15, 20 function imports. Who has an OData service with more than one function import? Function imports like evil, aren't they? Anyway, did I say that out loud on camera? I don't know. Anyway, so we've got the two calls. What are we going to do now? What we're going to do now is we're going to go back to our code and have a look at what we're going to do next. Now, the reason I've sort of done it with lots of comments and everything in all in one, and also I've got the functions sort of A and B, so I know what to do. So partly it's to help me while I'm standing here, but also then I'm going to make this available, obviously, so you can do this as well. So it's all in one file, it's really easy, and it's got some comments that hopefully make sense. So the first thing, once we've got the rule builder control on the screen, the first thing really we want to do, I'm going to go into here actually, and the first thing we want to do is, and in fact what I'll do so we're not confusing ourselves, clear console history. Nothing up my sleeve. So there we go. So retrieve project vocabulary. That is this direct read that we talked about before. Okay, so we want to read the vocabulary and then add that vocabulary data to the expression language control that we've just created and attached to the rule builder. Okay, notice that we're using x.project ID, that's that 3E8, which is the ID of the rule builder project that we just saw before, okay? So we're doing a read, and we're also saying, please expand from an OData perspective, the associations and the attributes in the data object. So let's do that. So let's run that command now. Can you see that at the bottom? Yeah. Okay, so let's run that. Let's go to actually the thing here. Okay, so good, vocabularies. Let's have a look at what that looks like. But this time, let's use You won't believe how small this is on my screen. There we go. Okay, that's better. So we see the result of the read, and what we're seeing here is, well, first of all, it's this project with 3E8D, and the data objects contains two things. Okay, guess what they are? They're the discount info structure. That structure has no associations. That structure has attributes, though. It's got one attribute. Oh, it's the discount field. And by the same token, this other thing is the flight info structure, and it's got no associations, but it's got an attribute called airline. So those are exactly the data objects that we saw in our business rule definition. Okay, so nothing complicated or nothing scary about that whatsoever. Okay, so what's the next thing we want to do? Well, the next thing we want to do is, oh, look at this, how organized is that? Is load the rule data. We've loaded the vocabulary data, now we want to load the rule data. And we do that in, again, with one of the mechanisms I find still the coolest thing in UI5. I can see it here as well, actually, it's quite good. One of the coolest things in UI5 ever is, of course, the data binding. It's like, oh my God, it's amazing. So we just say, oh, we'll bind this, and ooh, something happens in the background. So I'm binding the rule builder, the context path for the rule builder, to something that we sort of recognize from our administrative UI, which is /rules, and then ID, and then the rule ID. So the rule ID here is x.rule ID. That's that 1299A, which was the ID of the rule within our business rules airline discounts project. Okay, so I'll just run that now. Okay, B. And again, just because I like to see, I like to see things go past on network. It's just what's going on? What's going on? So let's remove that anyway. Remove that and run it. Okay. Oh my God, there's loads of stuff. So what's happened? Okay. Well, the rule builder control was there all the time. It was just waiting for data. It's almost like, when you instantiate a list from the sap.m library, it goes, no data. And then all of a sudden you bind it, it goes, whoosh, there you go. Okay, that's a technical term, by the way. What's happened is we've actually loaded, or there's been a number of calls made by the OData model for us. Obviously a call to the rules entity set, but also a call to another couple of entity sets, decision table rows and decision table columns, which are sort of, we don't have to explain those to each other. It's pretty obvious what they are. They're the rows and columns of the decision table. Okay, so far so good. And we're seeing now the data that we saw in our administrative editor. Great, so far so good. Now, what's the next thing? What did I do? That was B, and then C. Oh yes, that's right. Put rule builder into edit mode. Okay, so really, we want to start editing it. So we need to switch modes. Remember, we instantiated the rule builder in edit mode false. Now we're going to turn it on. So let's turn it on. That's quite good. Okay, so now a little bit changed here. I'm not sure whether you were looking, but a little bit changed here, and we're now in edit mode. So are we good to go? Let's just add a row to be able to add British Airways. Bang! Oh dear, what's going on here? Now, we get this message, which is actually really good. It tells you everything you need to know. Sometimes, you see these error messages and you go off trying to figure out what's going on, not reading the error message, and it's telling you everything you need to know. And this tells us that actually, you idiot, the parent entity rule with ID 299A, the whole decision table itself, the whole rule, is not in edit mode. Ah, okay, so the rule builder has an edit mode, but also the rule itself in the business rules service has an edit mode, as in this rule is being edited or it's not being edited. So let's fix that. D, put rule in edit mode. We're using one of these 57,000 function imports in the rule service OData model. Okay, no, not that many. And the function is called edit rule. Okay, so that's fairly okay. And we specify the rule ID, so let's run that. Edit successful. That means switched into edit mode successful. So there's the call to the edit rule thing here. So that decision table rows, that was the thing that we saw the error message from, parent rule not in edit mode. Okay? But now we see, ooh, edit rule, there's the function import. Did I do that again? Oh, didn't mean to. There's the edit successful. So now, what can we do? Well, in fact, before I do that, sorry, I'm going to do what I wanted to do, which was insert another line. I'm going to add British Airways. I'm going to add a discount. What discount should we say they've got? Like 2% because they're rubbish. Okay. So now we've got a new row with a couple of values in one of each of the columns. But don't remember that when we instantiated the data model for the rule service, we said the mode was two-way. So let's have a look. If there are any pending changes. Now, this, of course, is pure OData facility. So let's do that. E. Check for pending changes. In fact, I'll do that there, because then we can see that actually, yes, there are pending changes. And lo and behold, it's not unsurprising that we've got some pending changes relating to decision table row cells, BA and 2, and decision table row itself. So there's a new row with these cells in it. Okay, so let's do the needful and submit them. Okay, another OData mechanism, which is this code here. Submit changes, really simple. Submit pending changes. Let's switch to this so we can see it go past. Whoosh. Now, that says there's an error there. It's not an error, really. So there's some weirdness going on right now. I didn't want to hide it, but there's some weirdness. We get a 500, but actually, it worked. Okay, it's not my fault. But I will be speaking very gently, or you know, what's the phrase? Give them a light tap with a heavy stick, and sort that out. But anyway, it's worked. We've actually managed to send those pending changes to the back end. So the data is now stored. So what do we need to do next? Well, we need to activate the rule. Now, obviously, I'm really sort of over-egging this whole process, but you know, the process is involved, but the whole idea of this session is, like I say, to demystify it. So once you've been through this once, it's like, oh yeah, we'll do this, and so on. So we need to activate it. Now, what I didn't show you in the rule builder, in the administrative UI is you get the possibility to edit things, you get the possibility to activate stuff as well. So of course, you can edit stuff and leave it in inactive mode, and then you can activate it, but it's still not live. It's only live when you deploy it. So we're at the stage now where we've finished editing. We've allowed the user to edit something, and that we might want to put a button in our UI to say activate. Or we might even want to hide the whole concept to the user of the fact that things need activating as well as saving, and things need deploying as well as saving. We might have one big button saying danger, get them to press it, and it activates and deploys at the same time. Why not? Okay, we don't want to bother them with all the sort of boring interstitial stuff. But we're going to do it separately. So we're going to activate the rule using, surprise, surprise, another function import. Why not? We're all friends. So we'll have this function import do it for us. Yeah, see, took a bit of time. I was panicking there for about 400 milliseconds. Seems to be the key number. Okay, and what's happened here? Yes, we've got a success from our activate rule. The rule ID was 299A. Cool. So the rule is now active. Just to prove a point, I will now go and try and, there we go, invoke the rule and ask for the discount for British Airways. Where is it? The rule is active, but it's not been deployed. Okay, it's not been deployed to the business rules runtime. Okay, we've been thus far messing around with the design time API. Every interaction has been with the design time API. We're now going to be using the runtime API to deploy our activated rule. Okay? So go back and as with any API call that does anything interesting, and put it that way, we need a token. And just like I saw some token fetching before. I can't remember what it was. Oh, it was in the workflow. Yeah. Anyway, we need a CSRF token for obvious reasons. So we're going to use a sort of standard way of getting one of those. We just do a direct AJAX call, and of course, I didn't want to mess about with sort of asynchronicity and other albums by the police. But I'm just doing this fetch CSRF token once, and because I'm going to be talking in between doing that and doing the next one, the token will have been returned to us by the time I've actually typed the next thing in. So let's run that. And thank you, Frederick, for getting that joke. No, not deploy, sorry. Where are we? H. Okay, so we've got the token. What does the token look like? The token looks like... I've never understood why Chrome shows you the response headers before the request headers in the... Anyway, there it is. There's the token, 4B87 something. And then, of course, what we want to do now is use that token in our deploy. And this is where it gets a little bit exciting, not too exciting, but we're actually using a REST API. Having been a big fan of REST for a long time, I sort of find it a little bit awkward saying REST API, because there's no such thing as a REST API. A REST-informed API, maybe, but anyway. So we're just going to make a call to the BPM rules runtime path, which of course maps via neoop.json to the BPM rules runtime destination, which of course then in turn maps to the actual endpoint that we saw in the API hub before. And we send in the data a stringified version of, a JSON stringified version of literally just the project name and the rule service. The deploy to the runtime used to be a little bit more involved with this, and you had to send the actual IDs of the things in the long string and everything, and the query parameters. It's horrible. So this is really nice now, but it's really simple, okay? Pass the header, it's a post. So let's do it. And where are we? Oh, sorry. There we go. I've tweeted about this before, actually. This really nice MacBook, this control strip, tab strip thing, I hate it. As a Vim user, it's like pressing that when I'm pressing escape. So it's like, where's the escape key? There we go. Right, okay. So, I deploy rule. There we go. So let's run it. Deployed. Did take a split second. I think it was delaying it just to make us think it's doing some real work in the background, but it is, I suppose. So it's deployed. Okay. So is it deployed really? Let's try that thing again. Hello? Let me go back. Let me refresh that. My keyboard stopped working. It's because I complained about it, isn't it? Honestly, the keyboard stopped working. What? Oh, now, is it now working? Oh, okay, reconnect. Oh, to add to the suspense. Are there any questions, by the way, while we wait for my keyboard to start playing with me again? Oh, there we go. Never diss a keyboard in front of an audience again. And then we have 2%. I think the Business Rules Service deserves a round of applause. Well done, Business Rules Service. Basically, that really is, we've only got a few minutes left anyway, that really is all I wanted to show you. It is more involved than some of the controls we use on a day-to-day basis. But it's more involved because actually what we're trying to do with these controls in UI5 is also more involved. We're dealing with two OData services from the get-go. We're dealing with not only two OData services, but yet another endpoint, which is our runtime API to which we deploy. Notice, actually, interestingly enough, that it's the runtime API that we invoke to say what's the answer for British Airways, 2%, but it's also the runtime API that we use to actually deploy rather than the design time API. I suppose I have to pick one. So really, if you go away with no other thought other than actually I've been wondering about the business rules service in general, where it fits into the whole cloud platform story. Hopefully you understand a little bit more, very briefly at the start. But more importantly, if you've been thinking, what is this business rules rule builder? It seems about 1,000,001 things in the API. I'm not going to touch it because it looks too complicated. Actually, when you dive in, it's not that complicated. And it allows us to, when we're thinking about building our UI5 applications, to think about, well, actually, there is a facility for us to extract decision logic. You know, in 2 years' time, when we're all on S4HANA Cloud, you know, there is no SM31 anymore for users to maintain configuration. All right, 3 years' time then. So we need a facility that will work well for us in a Fiori context to allow business users to do a similar sort of thing. And that's what the business rules service is all about. And that's what the really nice collection, in my opinion, that's what the sap.rules.ui and friends is all about as well. So that's all I've got. We've got 5 minutes left. Are there any questions, or are you all waiting to go and have something to eat? Please, somebody ask one question so I'll get to throw this box. Or catch it at least. Oh my God. Okay, I'll throw it anyway. Here we go. Whoa!
Sadly, I have no question right now. So
that's okay.
Someone else?
Okay, well, with that then, thank you very much for your attention and have a good lunch.